You know, we're swimming in information these days. Some of it's good, some of it's misinformation, and some of it is just flat out wrong. We're always told to check the facts. But have you ever stopped to wonder who the fact checkers actually are? How do they decide what's true? And maybe the biggest question, why do we so often refuse to believe them? Well, today we're going to pull back that curtain and see how the facts really get checked.
So picture this. You're watching a debate, or maybe just a speech on TV, and you hear a claim that just makes you go, is that really true? Whose job is it to step in and verify that? Who's holding their feet to the fire?
Well, that's where fact checkers come in. This is really blown up as a specific field in journalism, especially since around the 2012 election. And their whole goal is pretty simple, but it's absolutely vital. They act as a political watchdog. The idea is to help us, the public, be well-informed, because, that's kind of the foundation of a healthy democracy. And let's be real, in today's pretty chaotic political world, that watchdog role feels more important than ever. And it turns out most of us actually agree on that.
This is what's so fascinating. Even with how divided we are on everything else, a study found that something like 80% of Americans, and that's across all party lines, actually want the media to fact-check politicians. It's like we all have this desire for a referee in the game. But here's the paradox. We want the ref, but we definitely don't always like their calls, especially when it's against our team.
Okay, but that brings up a really big question. I mean, politicians make thousands and thousands of claims. How on earth do fact-checkers decide which ones are even worth digging into?
To get that, we have to look at this idea from journalism called gatekeeping theory. Basically, it just means that information has to pass through a bunch of different filters or gates before it ever gets to you and me. And for fact-checking, there are three really big ones. So first, you've got the individual fact-checker. They're using their own gut feeling and experience to flag a claim that just doesn't sound right. Then that claim gets pushed through the next gate, professional routines. This is all the standard stuff, like using credible sources and trying to be objective. And finally, it has to pass through the last gate, which is the organization itself, the news outlet, with its own rules, its own standards, and its own goals for what it wants to publish.
So what gets a claim past all those gates? Well, they're typically looking for a few things. First, who's talking? They tend to focus on people in power because what they say has the biggest ripple effect. They also look for stuff that's super controversial, claims that could be really confusing to people, or anything that touches on a big national issue, like the economy or healthcare.
All right, so who are these organizations doing the checking? For the most part, they fall into two main groups. You've got your traditional newsrooms on one side, and then you have these independent outfits that only do fact-checking. And it turns out they don't always go about it in the same way.
So on one hand, you've got the big players, like the New York Times or the Washington Post. For them, fact-checking is just one part of their much larger news coverage. But on the other hand, you have places like PolitiFact and factcheck.org. Their entire mission, their only reason for existing is to debunk false information. They're often seen as trying to reform journalism, to bring a new level of accountability to it.
And to really see how different they are, a recent study from 2024 took a deep dive. They analyzed a whopping 440 different fact checks that came out of the 2020 U.S. presidential debates.
And what they found was a really clear difference in where they aimed their attention. Now, both groups did check the incumbent Donald Trump more often, which makes sense, right? They're focusing on the person in power. But the traditional news outlets did it way more. Almost 80% of their checks were on him, while for the independents, it was closer to 68%.
And the differences didn't stop there. The research also showed that the big news organizations were actually more likely to rate Trump's statements as incorrect than the independent outlets were. So this suggests there might be a real difference in how they make editorial judgments, or maybe the standards they use, between these two types of fact-checkers. So we have all these people working hard to check the facts, but that brings us to the biggest challenge of all, us, our brains. Why is it that when a fact check comes out that proves our favorite candidate was wrong, our first gut reaction is to get mad at the fact checker? Yeah, this is the heart of the problem, isn't it? Fact checkers are constantly getting accused of being biased, of being partisan. Their work gets written off as just somebody's opinion, especially if it goes against something we already believe. And the reason we do that is buried deep in our own psychology. It all comes down to something called cognitive dissonance. It's that jarring, really uncomfortable feeling you get when a new piece of information totally clashes with what you already believe. And to make that uncomfortable feeling go away, it's often way easier for our brains to just reject the new information, to reject the fact check, than it is to change a belief we've held for a long time.
So if our brains are basically wired to push back, is fact-checking just a lost cause? Well, maybe not. In fact, some really cool new research suggests that how a fact check is presented, its format, can make all the difference in getting past our own biases.
So, researchers looked at two formats you see all the time. First is the single statement check. That's where an article just focuses on one claim from one politician. And then there's the multiple statement check, which bundles a bunch of claims from different politicians, often from opposite parties, all into one single article.
And here's the kicker. The study found that people have significantly more trust in a fact check when it includes claims from politicians of different parties. It was especially true when an article pointed out that, hey, both sides got some things wrong.
So why does this work so much better? It seems to be all about perception. Seeing both sides checked in the same place just feels more fair, more complete. It helps lower our defenses because it doesn't feel like one side is being unfairly singled out. It proves the watchdog is watching everybody, which makes the correction a little easier for our brains to swallow.
Which leaves us with a pretty cool final thought. In this big battle for truth, the facts themselves are really only half the story. The other half is just human psychology. So maybe, just maybe, overcoming our own biases isn't about yelling the facts louder. Maybe it's about presenting them smarter. Can better design actually help us become better listeners? Now that is a question worth checking.